thank you everybody being here in the Straight Talk Unedited, and I am absolutely privileged and overjoyed having somebody whom I respect a lot as a politician, as a pro-environment, I would say, executive, and whom I know more than a decade. Dr. Jairam Ramesh, former Environment Minister of India, currently the chairman of the Standing Committee, Parliamentary Standing Committee on Environment, Forest and Science. Dr. Ramesh, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Such a privilege to have you. And we have been, as I told you earlier, that I've been doing this program for more than a couple of months, but we have been mostly doing with the COVID thing, as the whole world has come to press the pause button with COVID. But today, I think the first program on environment, and such a joy to have you in the first program. So thank you, Dr. Ramesh, for being here. And before I start the queries and questions and all, let me tell you that Dr. Ramesh has always been a different kind of environment minister. I first met Dr. Ramesh, I think, at the sidelines of Copenhagen Climate Conference, the historic climate conference in 2009. And he has been such a wonderful, almost I say the friend, the way we interacted, the journalists out there, Dr. Ramesh, the way we interacted. And he's such a popular. I have never seen a more popular environment minister of India. I have seen personally journalists chasing him to the loo, to the toilet, and he has to turn back and say, "Let me go to the loo." I'm going to the loo. So that's a kind of popularity. Entire kind of G77, entire the kind of developing country, Dr. Ramesh had been the forefront of this climate movement. So thank you, Dr. Ramesh, for being here. And even after coming in the opposition, he has been constantly taking the cudgel for environment. When this issue of the code, the Green Code, National Green Tribunal was trying to be, this present government was trying to dilute the importance. Dr. Ramesh, I think, went to the court and stopped that from being happened. And now this EIA, the new EIA notification 2020 norms, and Dr. Ramesh has been tremendously strong on that. If I may quote from him, he wrote a letter, he tweeted that as well, to the present Environment Minister, Prakash Javadekar, also a copy to the present Vice President, where he said the strongest opposition to this particular thing. So before I go to anything else, Dr. Ramesh, may I start? What exactly you feel is wrong about this EIA 2020 notification?
Well, Jayanta, first of all, I think it's important to understand that this EIA notification 2020 is part of an approach of the government, of the present government. The priority is on ease of doing business. And therefore, they look at all environmental laws and environmental regulations as a burden and not as an obligation, not as a societal obligation, but as a burden. So if you look at the last 5-year record, they've opened up rich forest areas to coal mining. They have diluted laws relating to the development of coastal areas, coastal zones. They have diluted pollution control norms for thermal power plants. They've opened the door for privatization of degraded forest land. And as you have mentioned, they have taken systematic steps to emasculate the National Green Tribunal. So, the Prime Minister goes around the world pontificating about environment, talking about climate change, trying to be the great champion of the environment internationally. But he's not walking the talk, because if you look at the domestic record, it is a record of progressive weakening of laws, dilution of laws. As I said, the EIA notification 2020 is part of that mindset. Now, what is specifically wrong with this EIA 2020? I think there are three big areas, I would say. First, it's completely anti-democratic. It reduces the scope for public hearings, for environmental clearances. It exempts a whole set of projects from environmental impact assessment. And the most dangerously, local communities and local organizations and civil society organizations cannot bring to light environmental violations Only government bodies and government institutions can do this. So first and foremost, and of course, the fact that they've regularized ex post facto approval.
Mhm.
In other words, you violate, you break the law, and then we'll regularize that a little later after you've paid a fine. So the first thing is that it's deeply, deeply anti-public, anti-democratic. It goes against all norms of transparency and accountability. Secondly, we are in a public health crisis. The COVID crisis is a public health crisis, but it's a crisis born out of the way we have developed wet markets, the way we have managed environment and nature. So COVID-19 cannot be seen independent of the
Yes.
environment. Now, we know now, we have ample evidence that environment is a public health issue. Air pollution is a public health issue. Water pollution is a public health issue. Chemical contamination is a public health issue. Land degradation is a public health issue. Now, we know now that more than anything else, environment is not a middle class, elitist, urban pastime. It is something that is extracting a huge public cost across the country. It's not only affecting livelihoods, but it's also imposing a huge public health cost. So therefore, at such a time, to exempt a whole set of projects from environmental impact assessment, to regularize environmental violations, to reduce the public's role in environmental management, environmental monitoring, in my view, is not just anti-democratic, but is also anti-public health.
Okay. Okay.
Thirdly, I think what this notification does, the notification derives its power from the Mother Act. This is a
Mhm.
subordinate legislation. This is delegated legislation. Now, it's extraordinary that a subordinate legislation overrides the Mother Act. How can you override the act from which you derive your power? The act from which you derive your power is the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. And large parts of this, notification actually contravene the Mother Act, the Parent Act. So fundamentally, it's illegal. I mean, it simply goes against all canons of jurisprudence.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
think the notification, and they tried to pass it to issue it during the COVID lockdown
Yes,
period.
that
They,
absolutely.
they issued it one day before the lockdown. It was issued on the
Mhm.
22nd of March. And time was given, I think, till the end of June or thereabouts.
Initially.
Yeah, initially. And then I wrote to Mr. Javdekar, say, extend the period by 3 months.
Mhm.
So he extended it by, 2 months or, couple of days short of 3 months. So they had every intention of getting this notification through during the lockdown period, had there not been this huge public outcry and demand from political parties, state governments, Kerala government, Maharashtra government, Tamil Nadu government, various governments have written, Chhattisgarh government have written. So I think there has been a huge backlash. So let's see what happens. The 11th of
Uh,
August was the last date for getting public representations. They've got
mhm.
20 lakh public representations. Let's
Yes.
see what they do with it.
Uh, Before I go into further, you mentioned that it's also illegal because it's kind of contravenes with the Mother Act, that is 1986 Environment Protection Act. So, if government continues to kind of push the agenda of this EIA 2020, do you feel that either Congress as a party or you as an individual would like to go to the Supreme Court as you did before for the Prudent
100%.
Tribunal?
100%. I will certainly challenge it in the Supreme Court. I'm sure there
Okay.
will be others who will challenge it. I'm sure
Mhm.
there are a lot of environmental groups
Yes.
already, preparing to challenge it. Undoubtedly, this is not a battle that can be left half fought. We have to
Mhm.
fight this battle.
Okay.
Of course, Mr. Modi has never been known to change his mind,
Mhm.
even when he's proved to be completely wrong. Like, for example, on demonetization, But so I really, frankly, don't know what the government is going to do. The standing committee met on the 7th of August to consider the notification. There were six BJP members of parliament who objected, who didn't want the committee to discuss this notification. But I somehow
Okay.
managed to persuade them. So we have started the process. We have been getting a lot of representations from the public. The ministry has got 20 lakh representations. So, let's see what happens.
But as you said, perhaps the ministry doesn't have the quote unquote the power to change it. It has to come from the very top,
No, no,
the
no. I
prime
mean,
minister office.
Mr. Javdekar, the old, there used to be an old brand in Calcutta called HMV. Mr. Javdekar is HMV. All ministers in this cabinet are HMV. So, this is an HMV long playing record. Does the HMV record brand still stand? No.
The brand is there. Brand is still there.
I think Sanjeev
Brand is
Goenka,
still there.
RPG, yeah, bro, I remember.
Still there. Yes, his RPG is there. Okay. Now, this is a very interesting thing you said that it is not really a standalone effort. You mentioned that it is part of a overall kind of effort to dilute the environmental various laws and norms. But this obvious question comes: why then such a hue and cry with this particular EIA norm? Why we are silent relatively for a coal issue, for other environmental issue, for green tribunal? There has not been such a huge impact that what the EIA notification has attracted. What do you feel? What's the difference? Why people are not so vocal about the other environmental issues?
I think, the COVID crisis, lockdown period, people have had a little more time to read,
Perhaps.
to respond. And people also realize that this current crisis is not just a public health crisis, but is the cumulative effect of the manner in which we have interacted with nature and the environment, not only in India, but across the world. So that could be one reason, certainly.
Okay.
Even the Jayanto, but strictly speaking, I have to say this. When the government announced the auction for the coal mines, there were a number of coal mines in rich forest areas, and immediately Maharashtra government objected.
Yes.
Immediately Chhattisgarh government objected, and the government had to withdraw those mines from the auction process. So, the other issues have also been taken up. It's not as if it's only the
But not to
notification.
maybe
But I
not to
agree
the
with you.
scale of
The
this.
notification, the scale at which the notification has been taken up, has really become a people's issue, not just a governmental issue.
Exactly. Now, a very interesting happened with this EIA notification and the opposition that the Congress has been mounting. You have always been known as somebody who has been kind of opposing this so-called quote-unquote anti-environment things. But we saw that even the Congress President Sonia ji has given a very strong statement and strong interviews. And if I may kind of quote from an interview, when she was talking about the Adibashis and the forest dwelling communities being harassed by the forest department, quote unquote, twisted interpretation and shoddy implementation of the Forest Right Act, an act which came during the UPA. Now, do you feel that this opposition of Congress party, the Congress president being so kind of strong on this, do we see a Congress policy into it? It's something we'll be seeing more of that more pro environmental policy from the Congress.
So,
What do you feel?
Jayanto, let me say that the opposition to the environment notification is coming not just from environmentalists. It's coming from tribal groups. It's
Yes.
coming from social activists. So there is a human side to it. It's not just the environment side. It's not just the air, the water, the forests, the rivers, and so on, all the natural resources. But as Mrs. Gandhi rightly has pointed out, the Forest Rights Act. So there are livelihoods involved, livelihoods of forest dwellers, livelihood of tribal communities. So there is a people angle, and not just a natural resource. But I don't think that we should make this a Congress issue, BJP issue. Congress did this, BJP did this. Environment is a trans-political issue. Environment, as I said, is a public health issue. Environment is an issue that affects the livelihoods of tribals and forest-dwelling communities. So let's rise above these, party labels. Now, Mr. Javadekar will say, "Oh, but when Congress was in power," and Congress will say, "But when BJP is in power." I think we need to
Absolutely.
get out of this tutu meme business. I think
Enough
environment
of tutu mame,
is
we
a
have said.
serious issue. Environment is too fundamental an issue, too serious an issue to get caught in personalities. It's got nothing to do with me. It's got nothing to do with Mr. Javadekar. It's the whole approach. How you manage nature, and how you deal with nature. And we know in the last 10 years, particularly, the frequency of natural disasters has increased manifold. Look at what's happening in Kerala. Look at what's happening in parts of Karnataka. Look at what happened in Uttarakhand.
Yes. Absolutely.
So we have this evidence. I mean, Western Ghats, for example, a very, very crucial area of ecological concern for us. The way it's being damaged. So it was damaged during the Congress regime. It was damaged during the BJP regime. But I don't know with Congress or BJP. It's being damaged during a CPM regime now. So I
It's
think
happening in Trinamool regime as
we should
as
get
well.
out of this political posturing, and reducing every issue to a BJP issue or a Congress issue. Let's look at issues on their merits. If
We
Congress,
wish.
if Congress did not do something when it was in power, that's no reason for the BJP not to do it.
Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
cannot be.
Absolutely.
It cannot be an excuse for the BJP.
In fact, I'll come to that. There's some kind of logic being put forward by the BJP kind of ministers and the officials, and I would say the politicians. But before that, it's very interesting to know also Rahul Gandhi's position on it, because I can still remember in 2010 when Vedanta happened, and it was a Congress regime, the UPA was happening, and Rahul Gandhi took very strong position, very strong position, and Vedanta was issue was kind of counteracted. So it's very interesting to know how Rahul Gandhi is seeing this EIA notification and the overall environmental issue, because a lot of this EIA notification is going to impact the tribals, the forest dwellers.
As I mentioned to Jayanto, I think large number of representations, of course, have come from environmental groups, activists, and lawyers. But there have also been forest rights groups. There have also been tribal action groups, which have highlighted the negative impact, of this, of the EIA notification, and the fact that the relationship. When I was environment minister, we tried to bring about a convergence between the Forest Rights Act and the Forest Conservation Act, for example. In August of 2009, I had issued a guideline to all the states that we are not going to clear projects in forest areas unless the rights of people which are given to them under the Forest Rights Act are settled. Now that principle has been given the go by, So therefore, the Gram Sabhas, for example,
Gram
which are
Sabhas, yes.
empowered under the Forest Rights Act, have completely been marginalized. So this is an issue. I mean, I think people have, and as I told you, the Kerala government, the Maharashtra government, various governments, have objected across the board to provisions in the EIA notification. One of the provisions, for example, is that the central government will now take upon itself the responsibility for constituting state-level impact assessment authorities. I mean, this is completely anti-cooperative federalism. And, I told my friend Derek O'Brien, this is an issue that Mamata Banerjee should take a very strong stand on. This is undercutting the states. And, at a time when you want to, you have to increase, for example, one of the lessons from the COVID crisis is that we have to strengthen municipal administrations. We have to strengthen city administration. They have to be in the front line of not only public health, but they also have to be in the front line of environmental monitoring and management. Now that has been completely taken away from from the table by the environment impact assessment notification.
Okay, absolutely. I think can't agree more to that. Before I go over to other issues, there are so many issues of environment to talk with you. But before I go over from EIA, let me share with you with some of the BJP friends are saying that Congress is so strong about EIA right now. What they have done over the last decade or so when they were in power, utilizing the present EIA. And even they are referring that Dr. Jairam Ramesh has been taken away from the ministry because some projects were not being cleared. So it was the general perception. How you react to that?
Well, but Jayanto, really, I mean, this is something that happened a decade ago. I was
Yes.
minister from between 2009 2011. So there's no point going back in history. And if, as I said, if the Congress did something wrong, that's not a justification for the BJP, which claims to be a party with a difference, to repeat those mistakes of the Congress party. So, and I don't want to personalize this. It's got nothing to do with me as a person. I have no axe to grind. In this, I'm just doing it because I believe. I'm not an environmentalist, by the way. I came to the environment ministry completely cold. I mean, my whole experience was in finance, economics, commerce, trade, and so on. But when I was given the environment ministry's charge, I thought that my responsibility and my dharma was to enforce the laws relating to the environment. Now, Mr. Javadekar gets up routinely in parliament and says, I've cleared 3,000 projects, I've cleared 4,000 projects. One day
Yes.
I had to tell him,
One
your
day.
job is not to clear projects, your job is to enforce the laws. Your job is to enforce the standards and regulations. Your job is to protect the environment, not to, not to give projects a green channel. So
Yes,
I think,
absolutely.
now I don't
I think
really.
that the environment
So,
that the environmentalists have been talking that the
so I
environment
don't.
department should not be a post office.
Yeah,
It can't be a post office.
so the answer to your question is fine. I mean, what happened during the Congress regime after I left. I don't want to go back on that. But the fact is, yes, I faced opposition within my own government. My own ministerial colleagues were not in complete sympathy with what I was doing. I have said it publicly then, and I have said it publicly afterwards, and I'm saying it publicly again today. There were a large number of my own ministerial colleagues who were very uncomfortable with the stances that I took. But the stance that I took was simple. It was that we have laws, let's enforce the laws without fear or favor. So whether it was a Congress government, whether it was a BJP government, whether it was some other government, it didn't matter to me.
Absolutely.
In fact,
Do you
very many
do you
Congress.
think it's a mindset issue?
My own Congress government, which was in power in Maharashtra, when I said I will not clear the New Bombay International Airport,
Yes.
if you're not if that design, which meant destruction of large quantities, large acreage of mangrove forests, I'm not going to clear it. It was my own government. It was the Congress government. So it's not politics here. I don't think we should get into either individuals or politics. I think we should ask ourselves, why are we protecting the environment? We are protecting the environment so that we have a better quality of life.
Yes.
We have better public health. We protect livelihoods. And incidentally, we also protect the environment so that future generations are not going to be very adversely affected. But I'm not even looking at it from the future generation point of view. I'm looking at it from my generation's point of view.
Exactly. So do you think it's a mindset issue? The cutting across the parties, talking in favor of environment is something
It's a
considered
complete
anti-development?
environment. There are no votes in the environment. There are votes for jobs. There are votes for
No
highways.
vote.
There are votes for broad gauge lines. There are votes for steel factories. There are votes for investment. There are no votes.
No vote for environment.
There are no votes for the environment. There's no Green Party in India, for example.
Yes.
So
No Green Party in India so
it's
far.
difficult, Jan. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, and as I said, there are people cutting across political. In fact, the guys most skeptical about the environment were the leftists. They just did not believe in environmental protection at all. And as in my biography of Indira Gandhi, I have pointed out that many of the battles that Indira Gandhi had to fight with Jyoti Babu for the
Mhm.
protection of Calcutta wetlands. I mean,
Yes.
there is correspondence that I have reproduced in my book
Mhm.
on how Indira Gandhi uh, did her best to protect the wetlands of Calcutta, but Jyoti Babu would just not budge. So this cuts across political parties.
It cuts across political
This
parties.
mindset cuts across political parties.
Okay, let's take to another issue, which is something of, I think, global importance, is the climate change. When you have been at the helm of affair of environment in India, then the whole climate discourse globally has took a complete U-turn. In 2009, if you remember, in that Copenhagen summit, suddenly the world kind of took back and took notice of what is happening in the climate change area. And we find those of few of the journalists who were there in Copenhagen, we saw how the India's position suddenly being from a G77 position changed, and you clubbed with the China, the South Africa, and formed that basic group. So it's very interesting to know. It's part of the history, I know, but it's very interesting to know what transpired after Manmohan Singh ji came back on that evening in Copenhagen, and suddenly the whole thing turned around. If you can
Well,
share whatever you can.
in the last 10 years, the discourse on climate change has completely changed, Jayanta. I was criticized bitterly by Arun Jaitley, by the BJP in 2009, and subsequently by Mr. Modi as well. But they have now become the great champions of climate change. And they were the ones who signed the Paris Agreement in
Yes.
2015. Of course, the foundation stone for the Paris Agreement was laid in Copenhagen in 2009 and in Cancun in 2010, both of which I was privileged to attend. And yes, it was a breakthrough. And I think India played a very important role in the breakthrough, because Dr. Manmohan Singh told me that we are not part of the problem, but certainly we must become part of the solution. So I took that very seriously, and I think people who know climate change negotiations realize the constructive role that India played at Copenhagen and Cancun, which did not earn me any friends in India. The NGOs were against me. The Center for Science and Environment, for example,
Yeah.
very critical of me. The newspapers, the Times of India, very, very critical that I have bartered away India's sovereignty. Arun Jaitley was very critical, as I said. So, but people realize that we have to shift. And in the last 10 years, the consequences of global warming have become much more stark. As I said, the frequency of natural disasters has increased. And people now realize that this is not a theoretical proposition anymore. It's something that, and also public health concerns have come up, thanks to pollution. Although pollution is not a consequence of global warming, but nevertheless, it's part of the overall issue that we refer to as the environment. So, yes, it's been a huge journey from 2009.
Nine
And
and 10.
the positions that I took, we had 4 debates in Parliament. I remember Murli Manohar Joshi, very critical of the stance that I had taken. But today, I think people realize that we have to be part of an international solution. That we have to be constructive. We have responsibilities. Climate change. Our monsoons have become very uncertain. Our sea levels are rising. Sundarbans, for example, will be the first victim of the increase in sea levels. And our glaciers are retreating. Our forests, the quality of our forests is going down. So these are all realities which 10 years ago people said, no, 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 we were not responsible for carbon dioxide. There is a made in America carbon dioxide. There is a made in Europe carbon dioxide. But made in India carbon dioxide, there's a lot of place for made in India carbon dioxide. Well, that is crap. I mean, people, they were giving these arguments. And I remember the biggest argument that was given was that per capita emissions is very low.
Yes.
Anything in India per capita is very low because the denominator is 1.2 billion, 1.3 billion, and is increasing by 10 million every year. So that's a completely hogwash of an argument. But think we have moved. I mean, I'm glad we have
We have
moved.
moved from that.
And we have moved, and most satisfactorily for me is that the party which opposed me has now become the great champion of India, taking the lead on global warming.
In fact, Dr. Ramesh, as we speak today, Sundarbans right now is in another spell of disaster. From yesterday, the major part of Sundarban has been completely flooded, inundated with high tide and everything. So, as you said, the disasters are happening everywhere. But I remember still, because you kind of raised that issue in Cancun, you perhaps went beyond the brief being given in the parliament and actually mentioned for the first time that all the countries will have to take responsibility of emission cut, which subsequently has become the global roadmap. Remember that you
I
went, you
remember.
saw, you showed me that
Don't
pink
I
color
remember?
right
Don't I
up.
remember that?
I still remember.
I put that in at the last minute in my own handwriting. All
Yes, I saw
countries,
that.
all countries must take on responsibilities in appropriate legal form, and that
Yes,
created a huge. It didn't win me.
absolutely.
It didn't win me friends in India, but Chancellor Merkel was very, very happy. She called up Dr. Manmohan Singh and congratulated, India. The president of Maldives, Mohammad Nasheed, was very, very happy. The international community was very happy. But I'm afraid, in India, I faced a
Not
lot
many
of
friends.
trouble. But Dr. Manmohan Singh supported me on this, he supported me on this. And Indian industry also, the CII and FICCI were very unhappy. But yes, that was the key turning point. The first
Very,
turning
very key
point was
turning point.
Copenhagen. The second turning point was Cancun. I've written something on this. I'll send you and you can circulate it to your friends.
Sure, sure, absolutely. I'll do that. I'll do that.
What happened in the background. I've written something on this. I'll send
That
it
is
to you.
fascinating because I
I-
still remember that when Dr. Manmohan Singh went away from Cancun, Bella Center, if I can remember correctly, Bella Center, and
yeah.
it was sub-zero temperature outside. We were all kind of key in our copies because Indian time and Copenhagen time was about 4.5 hours away. Suddenly it came on us that something is happening. And I was just having a bite in my a burger, just threw it and ran. And then I saw you walking down regally in your sherwani and saying the deal has been sealed. So that was one of the dramatic climate change negotiation point I've ever seen.
Well, I'll
That's
send you.
absolutely dramatic.
I'll send you. I've written something on what happened in Copenhagen and what has happened in Cancun, and you can circulate it amongst the people who are
Absolutely,
attending
absolutely. I'll do that. I'll do that.
discussion.
Before I shift from the climate change, one question I have: after you came back from Copenhagen, perhaps after Cancun, you in an interview told me that India's climate policy, Janta, is like Ma Kali policy. So we have America in one hand, we have China, and we have G77 in the Europe. So from that on, from that Ma Kali policy of climate change, now what do you feel? It's just a one strict policy where we are right now. How you see the India's policy on climate change right now?
Well, I think I congratulate Mr. Modi's government for being aggressive on solar energy.
Yes, absolutely.
When I was minister, solar prices were about between 12 to 15 rupees a unit. But solar prices have come down dramatically, and today they are less than 3 rupees a unit. And I think the government has embraced this aggressively. It's driven this price fall. We gave a target of 20,000 megawatts. Mr. Modi increased it fivefold to 100,000 megawatts, and I welcome that. I think India must be a world leader in solar energy, and solar energy offers not only it offers the prospect of decentralized energy production and distribution. But there are other aspects of the climate change negotiations which are deeply worrying. Forests, for example, if you're going to open up forests for coal mining, and if you're not going to protect your forests, and if you think that you can substitute loss of natural forests by compensatory afforestation, I think you're not doing justice ecologically. So that's something that I'm very, very concerned about. But I have no doubt in my mind that we will reach our Paris Agreement commitments as far as solar energy and wind energy is concerned. I have no doubt in my mind that we will reach our commitments that we made. These were commitments, incidentally, that were made in Copenhagen, for which I was criticized, but which, Mr. Modi and Mr. Javadekar then made in Paris, which is very good. I mean, I have no problem. And I welcomed it then. But I think we will have a problem in meeting our commitments in relation to forests. And that's going to be a very, very important weakness or a lacuna in our global effort at, combating global warming.
But overall, do you consider that this COVID will push back the climate actions because now the governments have not money, there's been recession?
Jayanta, I am very worried that what's going to happen is that in the name of economic recovery, in the name of faster economic recovery, government has already relaxed a lot of labor laws. Government has relaxed a lot of land laws. This EIA notification is part of that relaxation syndrome. So government may well say that our priority now is to generate investment, generate jobs, revive economic activity. So we'll worry about protecting the environment later. And this is a very seductive argument, very, very seductive. Because clearly we need economic recovery. But in my view, if you're going to base economic recovery on relaxation and dilution of environmental laws, you're doing long-term damage to yourself. You're not only doing long-term damage, you're doing short-term damage. You're going to have short-term, public health consequences as well. So that's what I'm really worried about. I'm really.
You see it happening across the world.
I see this happening across the world. Although hopefully, if Trump doesn't get re-elected, then the United States, will come back into the international institutional framework. I don't know about China because there's a lot of anti-China and justifiably so. China has worked hard to earn a bad name for itself, politically and otherwise. So I don't know how China is going to play out, but I think India must stand up for its environmental laws. This is the time when we have to enforce these laws. I don't think that by enforcing these laws you're going to slow down recovery. By enforcing these laws, you'll actually make the recovery more sustainable.
Make it more sustainable. Great. I think that is something which all we feel that this how this COVID will kind of spread out vis-a-vis the climate change and how the governments will act. Already Donald Trump has announced in USA that the environmental rules and norms will be diluted to accommodate the so-called polluters. So already the indications are there.
Trump has already diluted it. I mean, in the last 4 years, he's made up, not only has he withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, but he's also, diluted a lot of domestic laws, which have been on the books for decades. So that process in the US has already started, actually.
Okay. I think now let me go over to, as I kind of discussed with you, as I already kind of shared with you, that towards the end of this program, there are some experts across the country who are here, and I'll be taking a few questions for Dr. Ramesh from them. But before that, I have my questions which on Ganga. Our Prime Minister has won the election from Varanasi, which is a very clear political message in that to link Ganga with the political process. But unfortunately, we haven't seen much on ground. The Ganga is still being quite polluted. And something you started, NGRBA, kind of almost like a no-starter. And person after person they're being kind of fasting, people are dying, but apparently the government has not much response to that. Shivanandaji is now fasting for Ganga. What do you think?
Well, the government it changed Mission Clean Ganga, which I had announced in 2010, and they called it Namami Gange in 2014. So we have Namami Gange program. Now, the Mission Ganga that I had announced had two components. One was Nirmal Ganga, which is clean Ganga. And the second one was Aviral Ganga, which is continuous flow of the Ganga. Now, you cannot have Nirmal Ganga without Aviral Ganga.
Yes.
You cannot have clean water without water being there in the first place. So the contradiction in what Mr. Modi is trying to do, he is claiming credit for Nirmal Ganga. But Ganga cannot be Nirmal if you are going to interfere with the aviral part of the mission. So by building dams after dams, by, for example, this inland waterways projects of Mr. Gadkari, we had declared the dolphin as the national aquatic mammal. And one of the casualties of this massive dredging exercise that is part of the inland waterways is going to be a severe threat on the Gangetic dolphin. So I think, the aviral part, the siltation in the Farakka, which has become a big issue.
This political issue.
As a big issue as far as Bihar is concerned. So
they are demanding to break down Farakka.
So there is a Nirmal Ganga part, which the government has taken forward. Namami Gange has taken forward Mission Clean Ganga, invested more in sewage control, cleaning, banning plastics, all that they have carried forward. But what they have not done is the aviral part. So there is a Nirmal Ganga and there is an aviral Ganga. Minimum ecological flow, that has to be ensured. So that is where I find Namami Gange completely lacking.
That is lacking now. And do you think that this present BJP government, Prime Minister in particular, has been raising Ganga issue time and again just for the sake of politics? Is it clear that it's just for politics?
Ayodhya was politics. Ganga was politics. Yeah, but forget. Mr. Rajiv Gandhi started Project Ganga in 1986.
Yes.
In fact, the foundation for Clean Ganga was laid by Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, in 1983. But she was assassinated, so that was not started. And then Mr. Gandhi went to Varanasi, and he launched Project Ganga, Clean Ganga. It was called Project Ganga. He launched it from Dashashwamedh Ghat. So there is no doubt that Ganga is extraordinarily polluted, particularly from Kannauj to Varanasi. It's about a 750 kilometer stretch. The Ganga is, linked with our culture, linked with our history, linked with our mythology, linked with our history. So there is a certain fascination with the Ganga, but the Yamuna is equally worse. Is in a worse state. So I started in my time with Japanese assistance, the Yamuna, the Clean Yamuna project, the Yamuna Action Plan. There are many other rivers that are equally polluted. So we had a national river conservation program that had started. Mm-hmm. So in fact, West Bengal is one of the states in which the Ganga was relatively better. Compared to UP, compared to Jharkhand, compared to Uttarakhand. West Bengal had done relatively better during my time and subsequently also as well.
Mm-hmm. I think I asked this question simply because, as I referred before, the number of persons are fasting. The sadhus are fasting, and they are dying, protesting, as you said. They are demanding the Dhara. But the government has no.
Jayanto, they are demanding aviral Ganga. Professor G.
Yes, they're demanding aviral Ganga.
Professor G.D. Agarwal.
Yes, absolutely.
Who
G.D. Agarwal. Yes.
Passed away. Their focus was on aviral Ganga. Of course, they wanted Ganga,
absolutely.
But their focus was more on the aviral part.
Even, and that's not being happening.
Mr. Nitish Kumar, who is part of the NDA, he has appeared on so many platforms with me, saying that aviral Ganga ke bina Ganga nirmal mein nahi ban sakta. Nirmal Ganga kabhi maine rakhega jab Ganga aviral hai. अविरलता और निर्मलता दोनों एक ही सिक्के के दो चेहरे हैं. This is what he has said.
But unfortunately, the present government doesn't see in that way so far.
They don't see it. They don't see it.
Before I will go over to Professor Urunama Mojumdar, who has been working a lot with Ganga. But before I go over to Professor Mojumdar, let me ask a question, because you kind of started, you pioneered that, is the Sundarbans. Because Sundarbans, all of us are, most of the people are from West Bengal, and all of us are having that understanding and the sentiment about the Sundarbans. And Sundarban is globally one of the hotbed of climate change. Unfortunately, you kind of started it. You came to West Bengal, you came to Kolkata, you had a joint meeting with the Bangladesh minister to start a process of acting together on Sundarban. But that didn't go far once you kind of went from the environment minister position. What do you feel? How don't you think that Sundarban is a win-win thing for both India and Bangladesh?
Well,
the restoration of Sundarban and
I started a joint India-Bangladesh Sundarbans forum, because it is one ecosystem. We are two countries. We are two sovereign countries. But ecosystems respect no geographical boundaries. 60% of the Sundarbans is in Bangladesh, and 40% of the Sundarbans is in West Bengal, is in India. But it's one ecosystem. So I started this forum. We had a meeting. We had a meeting in Bangladesh. We had a meeting in Calcutta. But unfortunately, it was not taken forward. And I still believe today that for example, there was a tripartite program that I had launched for Mount Kailash between India, China, and Nepal. Similarly, we need a joint India-Bangladesh program for the Sundarbans. And I think the West Bengal government should take the lead and demand from the central government. This is a win-win. This is a win-win situation for both, because both are going to be threatened. It's not that neither.
Exactly.
Both are threatened.
Royal Bengal tiger and all. Hasina ji even wrote when she came to India last time that Sundarban should be a win-win thing, as we are just saying. It is a win-win thing.
It requires push. It requires commitment.
It
requires push, and
perhaps the state government should do more about it.
Yes, I certainly feel that the government should do more about it. I think both governments should have, the vision, because Sundarbans is one ecosystem, and it is threatened. It's threatened in diverse ways, and it's going to create a lot of migration. There are going to be a lot of climate refugees, over the next 10, 15 years. So I think, the issues are common. I think we should discuss them. We should. Yeah,
issues are common. Okay, I have few questions left, but let me go over to Professor Urunama Mojumdar. Urunama, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question to Dr. Ramesh. Professor Urunama Mojumdar, former head of public health and hygiene.
Namaskar. Sir, in India, many rivers are dead and many rivers are dying for want of ecological flow. You mentioned that. River Ganga was declared polluted in the year, early 80s, actually. For abatement of river pollution of Ganga Action Plan was started in the year 1985, and the work still going on. And presently, under Namami Ganga program, several works are being taken up. But issue is this, that 60% of our urban wastewater is not getting treated. We have no facility for that. Even the small scale industries, medium scale industries are not taking up proper pollution control measures. Non-point sources pollutions are around 20 to 25%. Now, looking into this particular aspect, we are finding that the regulations with respect to standards are getting changed, becoming stringent to make it normal. But we feel that the Ganga River basin management is a necessity through holistic approach to achieve clean Ganga with ecological flow. That is Nirmal and Abhidal Dhara. You mentioned that, sir. Do you think that we are not addressing properly the rational groundwater and surface water management in the Ganga River basin?
Well, yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons why I had got this consortium of IITs to prepare a comprehensive basin management plan. Now, they have submitted this report 5 years ago. 3-volume report on basin management. You are aware of it. IIT Kharagpur also was very much involved in this. They prepared a draft law for protecting the Ganga. I don't know what's holding it up because this was submitted almost 5 years ago. But I agree with you, But you see, a lot of it, a lot of action has already happened. A lot of water has already been withdrawn for irrigation. A lot of water has already been withdrawn for drinking water. So you can't undo that. What you can prevent is, for example, you can prevent further damage by not having hydropower plants in the upper reaches of the Ganga, the Alaknanda, the Bhagirathi, the Mandakini, and so on. That's one thing you can do. The other thing you can certainly do is on this, the inland waterways. With the example that I mentioned. So there are things that you can do, and conjunctive use of surface water and groundwater. These are things that have been talked about. Better water management, better distribution of water. Our distribution losses in water are very, 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 very high. And in fact, coincidentally, when I was rural development minister, started a major project in West Bengal with Manas Bhuya, who then was my colleague in the Congress party. And we started a big project, Purulia, Bankura, Midnapur, for improving distribution efficiency of water, water distribution. So I entirely agree with you that we can keep on building sewage treatment plants, but the problem is elsewhere. The problem is really comprehensive basin management. You need a basin management approach.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Ornaboda, for your question. Let me go to Naboda. Dr. Ramesh, Nabodotto is one of the frontline environmental activists, not only in West Bengal, but in the country. And if you may remember, the very well-known Chichurgeria case of silicosis in the Supreme Court, that was actually being pioneered by Naboda and his organization, Nagorik Moncho, along with the State Pollution Control Board. Naboda, if you can unmute yourself. Naboda, আপনি তো আপনাকে unmute করুন এবং আপনার প্রশ্ন ডক্টর রমেশের কাছে যদি রাখেন। Naboda, আপনাকে unmute করতে হবে। Naboda, unmute করতে পারছেন? I have the questions of him, so I think there's some problem with the Naboda's. I have the questions, so let me kind of come up with the question. I have this backup with me. Naboda has two questions, Dr. Ramesh, for you. First is, we are all talking about the pollution in ambient air. We are talking about the general pollution, but what about the pollution within the factories? The factories act as that old acts we still have, and there's little consideration about the pollution within the factories. So what about the kind of occupational hazard that people are facing? And what the Congress position on that? Because it is something being talked about a lot. So what's Congress position on that? What's your position on that? And the second question, almost a related question, as I mentioned about the silicosis, the disease like silicosis, which are there because the people are made to work in such an oppressive environment. If you go to Asansol, you go to Chhattisgarh, you will find people are working in that kind of environment. So how and what should we do to stop this kind of process? And we are talking about these migrant workers and all. So these are the two questions they have. First is about the occupational hazard, the Factory Act, and second is silicosis.
Well, I think we have over the years introduced norms for occupational health and safety, but they have not, whether it's asbestos, whether it's silicosis, it's not really been taken very seriously. What's been taken seriously is emissions, because those are monitored. But within the factory precincts, whether health standards are adopted, whether occupational safety standards are adopted, this is something that has not got the attention it deserves. For example, the pollution control boards really monitor emissions. They monitor outside the factory precincts. They don't really monitor within. They assume that there is. Of course, there are factory inspectors, but we all know the fate of these inspections and inspectors. They're all manageable commodities. So yeah, I mean these are
Absolutely.
we've had for example, what happened? We've had the worst industrial catastrophe in history in Bhopal in 1984. Incidentally, people don't realize that the Environment Protection Act of 1986 is a direct consequence of what happened in Bhopal in 1984. It was because of that industrial disaster that Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, who had just taken over as Prime Minister, decided that we must have a tough law governing environmental protection. And that's how the environmental, Mr. T.N. Seshan was given the responsibility. And in 86, the Environment Protection Act came into being. So the background is what happened in Bhopal. So I agree that there's a lot left to be done in the implementation of occupational health and safety. That's an area that has not received as much attention as it should have, and certainly it has received much less attention than environment and pollution. That's for sure.
I think very clear what Dr. Ramesh has just said. Before I go on to my final question, this question from Sanjay Bashisht. Sanjay Bashisht, as you know, is the president of the CANSA, Climate Action Network South Asia. So Sanjay was supposed to be part, but his mother suddenly got ill, and so he just kind of WhatsApped me the question. With COVID as priority and economy is down, the government is going back on coal to generate revenue. What is your opinion about it?
Well, we are in a difficult situation because we need coal. We can't immediately say that we'll do without coal. We can't be like what the Germans have done, for example, because renewables do not. We do not have a revolution in energy storage, and the renewables function for only about 20% of the time. I mean, so you don't have round the clock availability. Availability is much lower. The availability comes from gas-based power plants or coal-based power plants or nuclear power plants. Now, we have not been able to increase our nuclear capacity for a variety of reasons. We have to import the gas, and we have the coal. So we have to. I mean, we are stuck with a situation where, I would say, for the next 7 to 10 years, we have to live with coal. So we have to make coal cleaner coal. Clean coal is a contradiction in terms. Coal can never be clean. The mining of coal can never be clean. The transportation of coal can never be clean. The utilization of coal can never be clean. But we can have cleaner coal. But I have been saying, when I was the minister, we looked at 9 coal fields of the country, and we came out with an exercise which said that 70% of the coal is in go areas and 30% of the coal is in the no-go areas, that they should not be mined under any circumstance. Unfortunately, that 70-30 has become 95-5. Now 95% is in the go area and 5% is in the no-go area. And in the recent auction, large number of blocks in the no-go areas were offered for blocks. So the government is, there's no I don't mind saying it. The reason why they did it is because Mr. Adani has his eyes on those coal blocks. So this is an Adani enterprise, not a coal enterprise. But I'm realistic about coal. But India must take a conscious decision that we will peak our coal production and utilization at maybe 1 billion. We are right now at about 700 million tons. We must peak it at about 1 billion tons in the next 7 to 10 years. And by 2030,
and then slide down.
By 2030,
slide down.
we must start phasing down. By 2050, by 2050, we should 30 years time we should just completely do away with coal. There's no question about it.
So, so very clear. You say that 2030.
But the Prime Minister has called coal black diamond. Now, I remember when I was working on coal in the 1980s, early 80s, that was what it used to be called, coal, black diamond. But not in 2020, when every country is thinking of phasing out of coal. So.
And Dr. Ramesh, it's very bizarre to see that the same government is promoting so aggressively the solar power and the coal. The same document, you see the coal. That's such an aggressive.
I mean, as I said, you need that. You know, right now, with today's technology, 1 gigawatt of renewables requires 1 gigawatt of fossil. That's the unfortunate reality. Now, if we had a lot of gas available, we could have substituted a lot of these coal-based plants by gas-based plants. But we have to import the gas, which we are. We are importing the gas, LNG from the United States now, for example. So we are stuck with coal. You know, I've called this some years ago. I called this India's cruel coal conundrum. You know, this is a conundrum. It's a dependence that we have to get out of, but it's a dependence we can't get out of in the next maybe decade or so, unless there is a revolution like we had on the mobile phone.
Yes.
If we have an energy storage device like this, then of course this whole situation changes. But otherwise, you say that by 2030, India should peak, and then it gradually slides down. I have written this, and I sincerely believe that India should peak by 2030. China has already peaked, by the way, but China has peaked at about 4 billion tons, and I'm saying we should peak at about a billion or a billion and a half maximum.
Before I ask you the final question, let me share with the audience that Dr. Ramesh, apart from being a front-line Congress leader in the country, has taken up the cudgel of writing the history. I don't know, some film director will do series of films on what he's writing. He has been researching and writing like a. I don't see any other political person is doing it. His latest book, A Checkered Brilliance: The Many Lives of B.K. Krishna Menon. Many of you perhaps have seen the review today in Ananda Bazaar. Perhaps you have seen that review. And it is a wonderful, I was just going through some parts of it. Dr. Ramesh yet not has gifted me the book, so I didn't have the chance to read it so far. But the point is the way he has it's like a very dramatic way, and it's the way he presented. And I know for sure that not only this book, there are a number of books before that Dr. Ramesh has kind of thrown light on the parts of history which were hitherto not being known. So I request all of you to kind of see this book, read this book, and circulate in your network, because it's something part of Indian history. And I request Dr. Ramesh to talk a bit about it before I ask the last question on it.
For 2 years, Krishna Menon was a member of parliament representing Midnapur from 1969 to 1971. He was an independent candidate supported by the left parties, and he contested from Midnapur after he had resigned from the Congress party. So it was a fascinating, very fascinating. My previous biography of P.N. Haksar, and this biography of Krishna Menon. P.N. Haksar, of course, had a long association with Bengal. He spoke Bengali. He was one of the key architects of the creation of Bangladesh in 1971. And he was for 25 years the chairman of the Indian Statistical Institute in Kolkata. So he had a long association. Krishna Menon, of course, was an MP from Midnapur. He was defense minister, and he was Nehru's soulmate, ideological, comrade from 1935 onwards, going back to the India League days. Of course, his career ended in 1962 during the time of the Chinese invasion, and I have dealt with that extensively. He was a very fascinating man, a much misunderstood man, but a man who played an absolutely critical role in the events leading up to independence in 1947. By virtue of his being in the India League, and by virtue of his being the interlocutor between the Congress Party and the Labour Party in England. And later on, of course, he played a key role in Korea, in the Suez Crisis. He used to be called Formula Menon in the United Nations. People hated him, they didn't like him, but they all went to him because he had a formula for solving every problem. And he, of course, was the first man to use the word non-alignment. In many ways, he was the one who gave currency to the idea of non-alignment. So today I find my friend Sumit Mitra has reviewed it in the Anand Bazar Patrika, and I'm sure that
beautiful review.
And I'm sure that the book, there are only two places in India where people still read books. One is Chennai and the other is Kolkata. So I hope people do read it in Kolkata.
Yes, absolutely. I think absolutely it's a part of history, and as you said, but he was also known as a communist by part of your.
Well, he once said that he was asked whether why was he a communist. He said, "I can't help it if the communists like me." He was not a card carrying communist. He was very close to the British Communist Party. Very close to the British Communist Party, because the British Communist Party was the only party supporting the full independence of India in the 1930s. He was close to the CPI. The CPI was very close to him, but he was not a card-carrying, communist at all. Although in '69, with the help of the communists, he became an independent MP from Midnapore, and in 1971. With the help of the left parties, he became an independent MP from Trivandrum, the same seat that Shashi Tharoor is now representing. So yes, he was very close to the leftists. He was an unrepented, unreconstructed, unabashed democratic socialist.
It will be fascinating reading that I have.
He was not a communist, but he was a democratic socialist.
Democratic socialist. I have written, for those of you who haven't read Dr. Ramesh's earlier books. I have the opportunity of kind of reading a couple of them. Then fascinating the way he packaged history. It's like a absolutely trained script writer, and I think there should be directors waiting in the wings in Bollywood to do some autobiographical films with the way you are doing. I think that very shortly we'll be seeing. I don't know, Dr. Ramesh, have you received any proposal for the film?
Well, I got a proposal.
Now, come on.
I have a proposal for both the Huxer book and the Menon book. So let's see what happens.
Okay, I was just wondering, you must have, because these are the way that you framed it. Anyway, my final question, Dr. Ramesh, is that coming back full circle to this EIA notification and your observation, your comment, Sonia ji's comment, and as you mentioned about Rahul ji's position, are we going to see a bit of a paradigm shift in the political discourse, especially of Congress party? Because as you said very rightly, that even in the UPA, there are part of Congress which were not very favorable to the environmental issues. Will you be seeing a more greener Congress in that way in some years to come? Greener Congress?
No, I think both Mrs. Gandhi and Mr. Rahul Gandhi very, very committed to the environment. And Mrs. Gandhi's article, Sonia Gandhi's article, was a reflection of her personal philosophy. She has always been interested on issues, concerned about issues about the environment, tribal welfare, land, and so on and so forth. Yes, the Congress Party has been, certainly our record has been far more pro-environment. Remember that it was Indira Gandhi's time that we had the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. We had the Water Pollution Control Act of 74.
1974.
We had the Air Pollution Control Act of 1981. Then we had the Forest Conservation Act of 1980. Then we had the Environment Protection Act of 1986. And then we had the Forest Rights Act of 2006. So all the 6 laws came about during Congress regimes.
And as you perhaps hinted, that because Congress is in, that's a different discussion for a different area, but Congress is in a, as I understand, as the journalists and the who following politics understand, Congress is in a bit of a churning. We are hearing that the leadership outside the Gandhi family, and there's all sort of things. I'm not going into those. But out of the churning, I was just wondering if the environment is becoming a bigger screw in the whole process. It's a more important in the context, in this whole churning that Congress is going through. That's what I asked the question.
I think the Congress is only reflecting the concerns which it's picking up, from people. It's people, various states are worried, organizations are worried. So, I think the Congress is responding to public concerns.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ramesh. It has been such a fascinating discussion, and
thank you very much.
I'm sure that we have heard, and they have been absolutely privileged to have it. If you have any final comment to make on this, anything what you would like to say to the people in Kolkata, I know you are very fond of Kolkata, and you have such great addas in Sundarbans and all that.
It's my favorite city. It's my favorite city, and I'm just waiting for travel to be resumed so that I can keep coming back to Kolkata.
Yes, we are all eagerly waiting for you to come to Kolkata, and
I hope to see you soon.
Perhaps releasing your book. We should do something about it in Kolkata to organize the release of the book.
Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Ramesh, for your time. We thought about 1 hour, but we crossed that. And all this entire discussion will be put to the YouTube very shortly, and I'll share the link with
Thank you.
And I hope the environmental researchers across the country will find a lot of materials in the discussion, whatever you have spent. And I am looking forward to receive from you the background stories of Cancun and Copenhagen.
In 2 minutes, I'm sending it to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Ramesh. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for being here and being part of this discussion. I think it's such a privilege to be here. Thank you all.
Good night.
So I think we can now switch off the recording.